and welcome to the Leadership Development Armory Lesson 2. Today we'll be hearing from Kaila Ogletree and Captain Leah Fowler about behavior management. Please be mindful that because this was recorded on Zoom, the quality of the audio and video isn't great, but the quality of the content is exceptional. We hope that this lesson is of value to your ministry. Please enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome to the Leadership Development Armory. Once again, my name is Summer Bossi. I'm the Christian Education Director for the Western Territory of the Youth Department, the Western Territory Youth Department. And our goal as a department has been to create some more training resources for you, our awesome youth leaders. And we're so excited to work together to discuss new youth topics and learn as a group. As a reminder, our overall objective is to create a space for diligent learning in order to develop and equip youth leaders. But we also want this to be a safe place to learn new things, ask questions, and make connections with fellow leaders of the Salvation Army. As a reminder, please be considerate of the intentionality of this group. Be on time, be respectful and active in listening and participation so that we may reach our fullest potential. We're really excited to hear from two guests today, Captain Leah Fowler and Kaila Ogletree. Kaila is going to be sharing a few quick behavior management tips, and she really sees the importance of creating a space where young people feel seen and safe. She got her bachelor's in psychology and master's in marital and family therapy. She's currently a pre-licensed therapist specializing in kids, teens, and adolescents, but also with individual couples and families. So we're really excited to hear from her today. And then Captain Leah is an officer in the California South Division. She served in the Army for almost 6 years with her husband Sam and two daughters, ages 3 and 5. Captain Leah got her bachelor's in primary education and a master's in international education. She has experience being a youth leader at the Corps and at Camp Homolani as well, and a swimming instructor for kids, and as an elementary school teacher for several years before she became an officer. So it's clear that she has a ton of experience with kids with many diverse needs and backgrounds. So before we start, I was going to ask somebody to open us up in prayer. Hey, Captain Harriet, would you be willing to open us up in prayer?
Yep. All right, let's pray.
Thanks.
Dear God, we're so grateful for this opportunity that we have to come together and to learn and grow. God, I pray that you would help us to continue to learn ways to help reach your people, Lord, to where we can shine your light in our community and we can be the best versions of ourselves that we can be, and that and help us to continue to learn new things to where we can continue to provide a safe space for kids to be who they are and to have fun and to express themselves, but to know that they are loved deeply by the creator of the universe. We're so grateful for this opportunity, Lord. Open our hearts and our minds and give us wisdom. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for that. Okay, so I'm not seeing Kaila on here just yet. So Captain Lee, if you want to take it away, you can go ahead and we'll have Kaila share afterwards.
All right, just tell me when to dip it and wrap it up, because I could chat about this all day. So for me, the most important thing when I think of behavior management, whether it's in a classroom or a day camp setting, away camp, weekly programs, whatever it is what is your purpose for having the kids gather there? All of our kids, I'm preaching to the choir, come from a very diverse range of backgrounds. So they're coming to us with their own schemas of behavior. What is appropriate? What is normal? What is considered to be kind of suitable within their sphere. Often that doesn't correlate with what we consider appropriate or ideal. And so I guess there's 5 main things that you want to be thinking about, because I can't speak to every circumstance that you're in. But what you want to be considering is the context of where you're in. So what are you aiming for when it comes to behavior management? What's the purpose of it? What are the outcomes? So for me, for the most part, it's keeping kids safe, allowing them to be engaged and involved as they're able, and keeping everyone sort of in alignment with whatever is happening. And so from there, you have to consider the culture that you're setting up. So as a classroom teacher, which is my first love, kids would come into the classroom, and for some of them, academic learning was super easy. Their brains were just created in a way that is very linear and that suited, that kind of very steady and stable learning environment that was set up in our school. It was a traditional kind of style of school, and so kids were expected to sit and to listen and to do as they were told, for lack of a better term. You very quickly realize that that doesn't work for all kids. And so as I would meet my new class each year, as I've gone to new core, as new kids would come in to each session of camp, or each group of little swimmers that I would teach, my expectations of the culture of that group would have to change, because each of them had unique needs and each of them would require a different approach. And I guess all that to say, there is no one size fits all model to behavior management. And if you attempt to put that into place, there's always going to be conflict. And so I'll touch on that in just a minute. I'm trying to buzz through these first things, just so you have an idea in mind of kind of where you're coming from. The other thing to kind of reflect upon yourself as well is control. So a lot of the time, behavior management is synonymous with control. The adult in the room, the leader controlling the group of children. And I know that everyone that I can see on here has been with groups of kids, and the second that you start to try and control them, you will have at least one, two, half of them who will try and upsurf that. It's just how they were created, or their experiences with leadership or those in authority are very negative. And so then, even if you're saying, come and join this fun activity, if it's authoritarian and follower, often there will be an immediate conflict. If you consider what you can control in an environment, the one thing is yourself. And so a very wise teacher once told me, always do a personal inventory before you walk into a room. It works on kids and adults. So for example, today, I've been running around with my head chopped off. Half of our staff is out sick right now. And so we have a harvest party this afternoon that we had to kind of come in and take over unexpectedly. I know that my reserves are down here. And so my 3-year-old is in the office with me on a daily basis. And so for me, it's taking a breath and going, what she's doing right now is normal for a 3-year-old. I can't control her. I shouldn't want to control her. That's, bordering on abusive if you come down to the real linear meanings of control. So how can I control myself, my temperament? What do I need? I don't know if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You got to make sure that you're fed, that you're rested, and that you feel safe. If you don't feel those things, there's no way that you can possibly engage with kids who also may not have those needs met. And so always take that personal inventory, because you cannot control a child's behavior. You can control yours though. And so I guess that's my underlying philosophy on behavior management, is if you are looking to create little robots, don't bother with youth ministry. It's just going to end up with you annoyed and them not having a good time. The next thing that you need to consider is, are you able to be consistent? So whatever you put into place, you've got to keep it the same the whole way through, because kids thrive with consistency. Particularly the youth that we often engage with in our ministries, they might not have consistency in other areas of their lives. And even if they do, my 5-year-old is a very type A personality. She needs to know what's happening to the minute of what's going on. If that consistency is taken away from her, everything else kind of falls apart. So this week with Spirit Week at school, you know, she's wearing different clothes every day, and the day they've got like fire drills and lockdown drills, everything has changed in her life. We've had to kind of readdress how we love on her, because that causes a lot of challenge. The last thing is community. So whatever systems of behavior management that you want to develop or put in place, how is that going to impact your community? Is it going to be divisive, or is it going to draw people together? Is it going to exclude kids, or is it going to allow them to be included? And so with that said, in my experience, through my university studies and particularly in the classroom, the best practice that I have come across and been a part of is something called restorative practices. I don't know if it's familiar to you. If you Google it in Google Scholar, a lot of really good articles will pop up. And basically it began in the juvenile justice system, where they realized that punitive punishments really didn't help the reoffense rates of young people as they were coming through the system. And so they were trying to discern what is a better way that we can work with these young people who are in crisis to try and help them make better choices in the future. And so that's where kind of this came from. And then it sort of flowed into the school system from that, because obviously if you can catch kids in schools, then hopefully they avoid the juvenile justice system altogether. And so basically the model focuses on problem solving rather than punitive punishment. The idea being that children need to be taught the skills of how to deal with problems they come up with. So when we're talking about behavior management, I think we can agree that it's those behaviors that are happening in our programs that are not helpful. You know, whether it's language being used, whether it's actions, whether it's compliance. And so how can we teach kids how to behave rather than just expecting it and then punishing it when it doesn't happen? So the best example is when kids are learning to walk and they fall over, you don't go up to them and smack them over the head and go, well, that was dumb. Why did you fall over? No, because a 1-year-old, right, they're learning how to do it. They need someone to hold their hands. They need safe spaces to fall. They need opportunities to practice. For some reason, we think that behavior is inherent. And for the most part, it's not, it's learned. And so what we need to do is make sure that we are putting things into place to teach kids how they can interact with one another, how they can interact with our space. The biggest challenge with that is, of course, what is happening outside of our walls may be very different. Kids are incredibly smart, though. They can tailor their behavior and their interactions, like depending on where they are. And so we never want to diminish their home experiences, of course. But I say it to my 5-year-old all the time. We don't do that in our home. You know, that's okay if others do it in their home. That's not what we do in ours. And so we've always used the same philosophy at the core and in my classrooms. You know, if that's how you do it at home, that's okay. You can talk about that with your grown-ups. But while we're here, we use respectful language. While we're here, our hands are used only in gentle ways. While we're here, you know, we keep our personal space bubble and we don't wrestle with our cousins on the concrete floor. You know, it's about giving them the opportunity to know how to act in the space that they're in. So I guess the next question that tends to come up is, so what do you do? And when a situation arises, so normally, for example, traditionally, a punitive punishment might involve like a timeout. isolating a child. You don't get to participate. You get your name put down on the clip chart. You get your color changed to red. All of those things end up pointing to shame, and they create a social hierarchy. My daughter was in pre-K last year, and they had my least favorite thing in the world, which is the clip chart, because it literally teaches children to rank each other by their behavior. She had a sweet boy in her class, and he is the youngest, and he also has some difficulty sitting still. His name was always on orange or red. And so Zoe, my daughter, who's a very black and white kid, she was like, well, is he a bad kid? And so it was, and her teacher was wonderful. It's just a system that their school uses. And so it was explained to her, well, no, just because he behaves in one way, he's still learning that. He's still learning to control his body. His body likes to move. It likes to wriggle. It likes to move around. But I would just urge you to use caution with any system that pit kids against each other. Because even though you might kind of view it as, well, this is motivation for them to get to the top, I would twist it around and say, how would you feel? In your line of work, if you sent an email and it had a spelling error and there was a giant sheet of DHQ and they put your name down, is that going to motivate you to proofread that email next time? Or is it just going to make you feel like, I'm not going to send any more emails because that was really embarrassing? And what does everyone else think? How much nicer is it when someone turns around and says, hey, I don't know if you realized, but there was actually a couple of spelling errors. Do you need help with this? You know, can I suggest some proofreading tools and whatnot? And so it's about giving kids the tools to change their behavior rather than just expecting it to happen because you said do better next time. The same thing kind of goes for in troops. We have found that I'll go back a second. At the end of the day, extrinsic reinforcement is not my favorite. If you look at all of the studies, you'll find that it's intrinsic motivation, so that desire to do something just because it's the right thing to do and it feels good. That is always the best long term. However, unlike a classroom or in our homes, we don't have these kids enough often to make that change happen in a kind of fast, effective way, especially if they're coming once a month periodically here and there, and if there's no reinforcement at home. So if you want to use external motivators, I would always recommend doing it as a group mentality. So, for example, we had a little jar when we were in Ketchikan. When we were in Alaska, we had about 45 kids at troops, and it was just Sam and I. And so we needed to have something to kind of help keep everyone going together. And so we just had this jar, and we had some pom-poms, because every corps has 12 million pom-poms. And anytime we caught someone being helpful or kind to someone else, would say, okay, Harriet, go grab a pom-pom, put it in the jar. It was, they could never be taken away. It was never associated with, if you don't do this, then you have to take one out. It was simply everyone working together. And what that allows, it means that you can tailor it to everyone's current, I guess, ability to be with the group. We had one little boy who had a habit of punching holes in walls. And so for him, if he was able to calmly, move from point A to point B, bang, we would immediately say, go and put a pom-pom in the jar. Now, there were some kids who didn't have issues with punching.
Cool, I'm unmuted.
And so they, the expectation was kind of higher, and you could tailor it to each of them. The good thing was, at the end of the day, once that jar was filled, they got to celebrate as a group. And it's that idea of building behavior through community. When everyone's working towards a common goal, that becomes a motivator of the kids who have an easy time supporting other kids. And it's not a me versus you. that works in any situation, from tiny groups to giant groups. And it just helps kind of include those kids who are always tend to be on the periphery and get labeled as the bad kids. When kids have a difficult time, obviously there's those situations where someone will come in and either they'll start calling someone names, they're threatening to run across the road, they're painting on the floor, whatever. Kids make messes. It's bound to happen. So there is the simple and the fastest way is to give a punitive punishment. You can't come anymore. You're not, you are going to miss out entirely on the playtime or, the treat at the end of the day, whatever. I would encourage you to try and use, I think Summer will have these available. They're restorative questions. So my school that I taught at went from being a very extrinsically motivated school. We had flip charts, we had points that you had to tally up. There were like 8 different systems and you had to be on top of it all the time. And it was really hard work. And they switched it completely. We got rid of every single extrinsic reward. I will put a caveat and say that the special ed department, they did reintroduce it appropriately for their kids who needed it, because some kids absolutely need that little bit of external motivation, particularly kids who are not neurotypical, because for them, they need to see something. But we started using these restorative questions to try and help kids who are having a hard time, whether it was within the classroom or whether it was on the playground, independently or in groups. So, for example, I would be out in the classroom and someone would come running up to me. I taught junior primary, so like 6, 7-year-olds, and they'd say, "Miss Ross, he just hit me." Now, the initial response, I think for most people, especially if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, was to go to person A and say, "All right, you need to go sit down. You don't get to play for the rest of recess." However, what that does is it places all of the focus on the action that has happened and not the story behind it. And so what we did was we would go up and we would have both kids come into conference. And the first question was always, "Tell me what happened." If you've done marriage counseling before, it was all about I statements. So, boy A would say, "Well, he did blah." You pause them there. What were you doing? "I was playing over by the monkey bars. And then I went across and then he hit me." Okay, and then you give the other child a chance to respond. "What were you doing?" "I was walking and I went past and he kicked me in the face on the monkey bars." "Oh, okay. So what did you do next?" "Well, I hit him because he kicked me." And, you kind of get down to the bottom of what was the scenario. And so in a situation like that, obviously someone hitting someone else is not appropriate. But the lesson underneath it is, okay, well, if someone kicks you on the monkey bars, first stop and say, "You just kicked me." Give them a strategy to use. The kid who was going across, make sure you're mindful of where your feet are going. And often that's where it would end. There was no timeout. There was no, you miss out on everything. You lose this. It was simply, what happened this time? How did it make the other person feel? How can you make it right? So an apology, whatever was necessary, helping them go and get an ice pack. And then what will you do next time to make sure it doesn't happen? And by going through that process, and it only took about 5 minutes most of the time, it allowed kids to be the problem solvers in the situation. And it allowed them to develop the skills. So when this happens next time, because kids will reach conflict moments over and over again, they'll reach moments where, they're bored in class or what have you. What am I going to do next time for a better outcome? And by doing that, the entire culture of the school changed. It took about 6 months, but we lost a lot of the bickering, a lot of the kind of smaller tiffs back and forth. There was a lot less escalation if there were issues, because the kids had learned what to do. They were starting to ask themselves and others those questions. So that's kind of how we've done that. We use this in summer day camp, and it works really effectively. And so basically these become laminated things, and all of our staff carry them around. And we found that it's made a huge change. I guess the last thing to keep in mind is you have to put your time somewhere when it comes to kids and when it comes to addressing behaviors. So while the criticism of this kind of system is that takes a long time, it's way easier to do a timeout. When you invest the time in creating a change in culture and teaching kids how to address their problems independently, then you save so much in the long term, not only just practically, but, in terms of how much of your energy has to go into redirecting kids and their challenges. I think that is the main thing. That is a very short overview, but I guess my main hit points are avoid any systems that will exclude kids or place them on a hierarchy, because they will backfire in the end and they're a lot more work for you. Feed into relationship building with them. Kids that you have the most difficulty with tend to be the ones who need that relationship the most. And the more you feed into it in a positive way, the more that they will tend to engage on the flip side. And yeah, I think that's just my 2 cents. If you want to look into it more, there's 2 really good books. They're focused on schools, but they apply perfectly to a core programming setting. So one is Margaret Thorsborn and Peter Blood, and the other is by Bill Hansbury.
And if you want to send those to me in an email, then I'll send out those books for reference, so that in that follow-up email with an infographic that kind of condenses both the little session, and then also I'll send Leah's resources as well. So thank you so much, Captain Leah, for just your wisdom in behavior management. We're going to hear really quickly from Kaila Ogletree about some quick tips as well to consider, but really great stuff, guys.
Yeah, so let me just pull up some stuff. Sorry, Summer, I forgot what I sent you, so just know that.
That's okay.
I was like, I sent her something. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaila. So I work with kids with autism, and I specialize in working with kids with autism. I work for a private practice where I specialize in working with kids, teens, adolescents. Just such a fun age group, and I've been doing it for a couple of years now. So yeah, just kind of wanted to tack on to Leah's great presentation about working with kids, and thought I could add some stuff about working specifically with kids that are neurodivergent. So I just have like 5 quick tips, and they're pretty practical. They're not necessarily resources, but just kind of ideas on how to get working with kids like that with this. And yeah, so tip number 1 is, I will say that routine and structure is part of their processing. So what I mean by that is, a lot of the time we have schedules and plans and all of these really great things, but we are really open, or can be really open to flexibility. But for a kid who is neurodivergent, structure and routine is a really big part of how they process the world. It's how they process what happens in their day. It's how they process what's going on. It's a huge kind of like jarring thing when you kind of disrupt their process. It kind of makes them feel like their world is falling apart. So being mindful that understanding that routine and structure is a huge part of how they get through their day and they understand how the world works. Thing number 2 is understanding how they process. There are a couple of different ways. A lot of us can be sensory. So if you kind of process things, or when you are overstimulated, right? You can get overstimulated. Sensory, which is sensations, or auditory, which is hearing. But understanding what that means for a kid. A lot of the times when we think of like, we have like youth nights and there's a kid who kind of is overwhelmed by everything that's happening when we're not sure what's going on with them. They're not able to communicate that. We need to understand how the stimulation in the room is affecting them. Is it overwhelming? Is it something that's causing them to not know how to express?
I'll be back in a little bit. I'm going to listen to.
They're not sure how to take in everything. So being mindful of how these kids will take in what's happening around them. Again, all these tips kind of tie into each other, I will say. So just being mindful of that, but understanding how people process. So if you think about even yourself, like how do you take in information? Are you a verbal processor? Do you talk it out? Are you understanding like, okay, if I work through this? Are you a more mental processor? Is it something that you kind of just think through and you're like, all right, this makes sense. I can now execute this. Knowing that about yourself is just as important as knowing that about the kids that you work with. I know that a lot of the times for me, when I look at my kids, I'm like, okay, you must all think the same way that I do. So that means whatever I do, you will kind of just learn and take in. That's not always true. Being mindful that they learn differently than I do, and I learn differently than they do. So taking the time to really learn how our kids process and what that means for them. Not only are we taking the time to learn them as human beings, but we're taking the time to learn and understand how we can effectively communicate with them and how they can effectively communicate with us. Step number 3, or tip number 3, is working in their framework. And what I mean by that is that neurotypical versus neurodivergent, that means we have 2 different types of brains working. So for example, I'm a musician, and a lot of the times I will use music analogies, which makes so much sense for my brain. Like it makes so much sense. But for someone who's not musical, if I'm talking about bass clef or treble clef, it means nothing to you. You have no idea what I'm saying. I'm basically speaking a completely different language. So working in someone else's framework, I have a teen currently who has autism, and her biggest way is to process through describing her emotions as characters. So for me, that doesn't necessarily make sense. I'm like, what does that mean? But she's basically taken like Inside Out, like the movie, and applied it to her life. So me being able to take the time and understand, so what does joy mean for you? What does it look like? What is she doing? What does anger look like for you? What is he doing? Taking the time to learn that and work within her framework instead of forcing her to work in mine. If I'm trying to get someone to understand music theory and they don't understand music theory, there's always going to be a disconnect. So being mindful of that. Tip number 4 is emotions can be bigger or smaller. So preparing for both. Sometimes we're running emotions through our own lens and thinking, okay, this is not a big deal. Like you tripped over something, like don't freak out. Where for this kid, it's completely disrupted their day. And it's not clear why or how it's disrupted their day, but we need to understand that it has. And if it has disrupted their day, how do we work through that? What does it mean to be able to understand why this emotion was so big? Is it a sense of embarrassment? Is it a sense of feeling like they're incapable of doing something? Is it a sense of, I don't know, whatever it could be? Taking the time to understand that some emotions will be really, really big for these kids, and some of them might be really small, and preparing for both. they're operating in their own framework, and being able to understand why and how they do this is important. And I think Leah touched on this too, but my last tip is just patience, being mindful of what our kids are bringing in and how we work through that with them. Each kid will kind of come in and present something differently. I think that's something I've learned and working in a private practice too, is that everyone comes in with something different. And as long as we're willing and ready to take on whatever it is and hold it with them, then the work will kind of just do itself in its own way, but being mindful of that it will come with its own challenges and it'll come with its own struggles. But if you are willing and ready and patient, then that's just, yeah, it'll be so worth it. So yeah, that's kind of all I have. It's kind of quick, but yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks so much, Kaila. And I think it's so important. I feel like both Kaila and Captain Leah talked about just the importance of the relationship with the kid, right? Getting to know them, getting to understand like what is going to be something that causes a big emotion, like what is going to be something that causes a small emotion. Understanding their needs and asking questions is so important when working with kids. So we're going to just open up this time for questions, for people to share their own personal experiences and behavior management tips and tricks that worked. I really like the pom-pom idea. My mom did something similar when she taught like us as kids with like stones, and there's some really good resources out there. So we want to pick your guys' brains about what kinds of different things have you found have worked, and feel free to ask our subject matter experts some any questions that you may have as well. Also, if you want to type in the chat, I'll monitor the chat and I can butt in, as I understand sometimes it's hard to work up the courage to unmute and to say it out loud. So.
All right, I'll go first. Emmanuel. First of all, thanks you, Leah and Kayla, for your presentation. Really awesome. Just a question, because I feel like a lot of volunteers we have, or I know even for myself, sometimes we get frustrated when we see the same negative behavior, maybe from the same child or children persisting. So maybe Captain Leah, in the example you gave, say you listen to the story of the kids on the playground, maybe the kid that was initially the one that did the kicking has done that 2 or 3 more times. How would you, what does that look like in terms of trying to arrive at a solution?
Yeah, that's always a challenge because sometimes it works the first time and sometimes this stuff takes a while. But if it's a situation where a child is putting themselves or others in harm's way, that kind of flicks the narrative a little bit. So if it was 2 kids, we have 2 kids at troop right now who, at the moment, they're not allowed to play in the same area together. It's just they're both younger and they both just kind of hit each other's buttons. So we've said to them, you know, when you're together in Explorers, that's okay. But when we're having free play time, you need to pick a spot. And so sometimes it is giving them a strategy that moves them away from each other. If it escalates still, we have, Sam and I, on 2 occasions, giving kids a pause from programming. We do everything in our power to avoid having to say you can't come because we want all kids to be welcome. But there was a situation where one of the boys, our core is right by a very main road, and he bolted one week, which was incredibly dangerous. And so we sat down with him and Mum said, look, he's going to have a break for 1 week, and then next week we'll come back and try again. And so sometimes it is implementing those things, but framing it from a safety point of view. He's not a bad kid. We want him here, Leah, but he needs to, you know, be able to follow instructions and be safe.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Any other questions, or even just like things that you found helpful in your youth programming, or just different things that you've kind of found?
Yeah, so I like what they said about like working in the framework of like how people process or how kids process. I know for me, like I come off like when I first meet somebody or when I introduce myself to somebody, I come off like really, really high energy, like really loud, really explosive. But like there's kids who don't receive that very well, right? You know, you come off super high, super like powerful and explosive. They're like, whoa, take a step back, bro. Give me some time to process this, right? So throughout the years, I've had to learn a different approach, which is mostly like, hey, hi, my name is Mr. Mike. How can I be of service to you? What can I do to make you feel comfortable in this youth group or make you feel a part in this youth group, right? And a lot of times that's not like being all like in their business. It's just giving them their space and just respecting them in that little bit. So like I really did like connect with when you said find a way to work within the kids' framework. That was good for me.
I think sometimes it's even sometimes we think about like it being this like super serious thing of like getting on their level. I had a kid that was in one of my third grade classes when I was student teaching, and he was always, because we used the clip chart, was always on red or yellow. He's just always having problems, and he wasn't a bad kid. Like I could tell that he just wasn't the kind of kid that wanted to get into trouble, but it just kind of happened. And there was something like I just started talking to him about stuff like Star Wars and Gravity Falls, and in being able to establish some of those connections with him of like, hey, like we like some of the same things, like let's work together on these things, really helped establish that relationship, so that he was like, oh, I want to be on Pink because Miss Summer wants me to be on Pink. And so yes, Gravity Falls. And so then that relationship really helped him to like, even though it was still really difficult and there was times like I could kind of be an advocate for him, but also like he was really like, because we had that relationship over something as silly as, you know, like a TV show, those kinds of things are so much bigger to them than what we think. So yeah, relationships so important.
I have two things, I guess, two questions. Because this happened at our last program Thursday. What happens when every single kid is in the wrong? Because a long story short, one kid is extremely socially awkward, not on the spectrum. He doesn't have a lot of friends. So, and this girl didn't like how awkward he was, so told him to, get out of my face in a mean way. And then that was like 2 weeks ago. Fast forward to this past week, she brought her sister, and her sister started berating that kid with mean comments in the van when we were driving to the Salvation Army, to the chapel. And I told them to calm down, to stop saying all that stuff, and they did. But once we got to the chapel and started our program, it was just them two going at it back and forth. And he was saying stuff and she was saying stuff, and it was just it was an issue to a point where I think the boy started crying and all that, and the girl started saying that all the staff members and volunteers don't like her anymore, and they're isolating her. And I don't know. Didn't know how to handle that situation because everybody was wrong. I couldn't like send everybody to sit outside, but the age group is middle school, I guess 6th to 8th grade, more on the 5th to 7th grade. But it was I don't know. I was just like, even my coworkers were like, "This is the first time we've seen a situation where everybody was in the wrong." Like the boy should have not pressed the issue on the girl, and the girl should have not pressed the issue on the boy, to a point where it was like even issue in the playground and everything. Is even dropping them off after the program was over, I had to rearrange the kids in the van so the girl can be in the back and the kid can sit in the front area. And it was just, I just didn't like how we had to take extra precautions just for 2 kids. And I felt like we're ignoring all the rest of the kids. But yeah, that's my first question. Sorry for the long spiel.
Hopefully my microphone will work. That's the kind of situation where, at least in my experience, this restorative questioning really helps, because it's bringing everyone who's involved together, and it's requiring them to hear the impact of their actions on one another without shame. So it's not you're doing this wrong and you're doing this wrong. It's hear what you've said and how that has been interpreted by the other person. I mean, when it comes to those situations, middle schools are tricky. That's not my area. They're not my niche group. But often their brains aren't clicking into what impact they're having on others around them. It can be literally like, you're annoying me, so go away. But like how much that can impact someone else. I think as well, sometimes it can be helpful to say to that like preteen age group, you don't have to be best friends with everyone. Some people you won't get along with, and that's okay. But it's never okay to disrespect or isolate them. I think sometimes we need to give kids permission to not force themselves on others. Because while it should be a requirement that everyone feels safe, that doesn't mean you have to sit next to them. It doesn't mean you have to, be best buddies. But someone else with strength in that age group might have a better idea.
Kaila, did you have anything that you wanted to add into that?
I think Leah touched on it pretty well, but I would say I do think it's kind of like a weird spot to kind of be like, yeah, you don't have to be friends with everybody. But I think a conversation, especially in giving teens permission, I also think there's another part to that of like allowing teens to know that like, yeah, they're allowed to not be friends with each other. But then also putting a little sense of responsibility. And I think something that I've seen to be helpful is really inviting teens into, or young adults into, a space where it's like, hey, I'm going to be really straightforward with you. Like sometimes we do things differently and sometimes we don't understand, and being mindful of that. And part of growing up is understanding that like people are different and they will handle things differently. So you have the choice to like interact or not interact, but they also have the choice to interact and not interact. And it's kind of this understanding of like a give and take, but also kind of a sense of consequences too, of like, what does it mean if we do interact and if we don't? And kind of just leaning on to what Leah said about the permission to, you're not going to be friends with everybody, and that's okay. That's part of growing up. So.
So my second add to this, what do I do? So I'm not sure if anybody's seen Fairly Odd Parents, but I feel like Mr. Crocker right now, thinking that the kids are conspiring to have a competition to see who like blows my top. Just a background, I'm ex-military. So I feel like there's a, so that's the thing. And it's always, I feel like the kids are trying to do one up each other. Like I had a girl come up to me, he's like, you gave us soda for snacks? You want to kill everybody at church? And I'm like, did it happen? No. And then I feel like I'm better at those type of like problems, but then like the other problem that happened, it's just a whole. Am I going crazy? Is that true? Like the kids conspire with each other to compete.
Oh yeah, for sure, 1,000%.
All right. I didn't want to go. I thought I was going crazy a little bit. I was like, no, because one kid we would do like a creative session. One kid, I'm done. And then I'm like, well, we're one unit, one team, one faith. So we're all done when everybody's done. All right. And he goes, but, and then goes all this back and forth with the kid. And then he goes back to another area. And another kid comes up and does another like spiel. And then another kid comes up and does another spiel. And I'm trying to go around like our table to talk about what the kids are drawing and stuff. But it's always one kid coming up, and then I'm looking around, and then 30 minutes pass, and then we're like mid-session. Yeah, but at least I know I'm not the only one. That's good enough. All right, sweet. Thank you.
Does anyone have any like kind of tips or just kind of some ideas about why kids might be doing that? Yeah, feel free to comment on that.
Hello. Can you guys hear me? Okay. My name's Larissa. I'm from the Modesto Community Center. So I run the teen program, and I can relate with you, Julian. So like when I first started, a couple of the first questions that teens had asked me is if I get mad. So I think it is a thing of just kind of remembering that at this age, or your 5th or 7th grade, that they want to see kind of like where they can like draw the line of testing authority, what they can get away with, what they can't get away with. And so important thing I think to remember is just remembering to like never show a child if you are mad, especially if it's with children that, are at risk teens, or just kids that, like you guys are saying in the chat, that they're coming from homes where, yelling and other negative things are normal. Just kind of remembering that they're trying to see where they can push you. So like you said, like feeling like Crocker. And then just remembering to always have grace and patience, and remembering where you're working and how to deal with these children or teens in a safe manner, of creating that safe space, especially when they are pushing your buttons on purpose, or if they know how to get to you and testing that authority. I think just always remembering where they come from, what they're dealing with, and that if they are testing you, just to, take time to check in with yourself, take time to see what's going on before you kind of show a child or a teen that you're upset with them, and kind of just doing it in a way of communicating with them in a positive manner, rather than, showing them that they got to you by making you upset.
Yeah, and I think that I think Leah may have mentioned this, is that you really have control over yourself. Like, it's the reminder that like these are, kids that are going to make their own choices. They're going to get upset about things. They're going to throw fits about things. And really, like, you only have control over the way that you're going to respond to it. And so I always find, like, whenever I work with kids, I try not to show my cards. I try to play a very cool, like, hey, yeah, like you gotta, like, we are working on this together, and if you want me to respect you as a teen, as a young person, then you need to respect me, because like respect is between the both of us. And so I want this to be like a mutually like beneficial relationship where, like, I get what I need, you get what you need. Like I care about you. I want you to get the things that you're going to need. but ultimately, like, I need you to be able to respect the things that I'm doing and to not try to push my buttons. But kids really do like to push your buttons. Just don't ever let them see your cards. Another thing that was thrown in the comments by Laura was that she notices that sometimes that those that identify as neurodivergent aren't the ones that cause problems in a group. It tends to be the youth that don't understand the behavior of kids that are neurodivergent and then end up isolating them. So do any of our subject matter experts have anything to add to that, or things to just say?
I think a lot of the time it's giving kids the benefit of the doubt that they might not be doing it maliciously. Depending on the group that you're in, it can be helpful to, obviously you ask the child in question first, but to say, like, you know, they have a little bit of a hard time joining into games. And I have to give the caveat, I have worked mostly with like the 12 and under age group. But I think this theory still applies to older kids as well, you know, to actually point it out to them, because if they had a, you know, physical challenge with doing something, that would be very obvious to another kid why they can't participate in the same way. But if it's something about how their brain is operating, to say to them, like, you know, he really doesn't like loud noises, so he has a hard time if you go up and, you know, are screaming in his face or whatever. And actually teaching kids about each other. You know, if a child has those challenges, if they have a hearing impairment or if they have a visual impairment, like, we would say to other kids, hey, can you, like, let's work around them and help them be involved in this game. And I think most of the time it's quite appropriate to help them recognize that they are all unique and different and that they can support each other. And sometimes by being proactive in doing that, it can sort of eliminate some of the other challenges. Yeah.
Some other things in the comments was talking a little bit more on consistency, which Captain Leah touched on, of making sure to have leaders that are on the same page with discipline. I think that's part of that consistency, is knowing what to expect and knowing that if I go to one leader, it's going to be the same as the other one. My parents would always say, we're a team, so you can't pin one of us against the other. Like, the same answer is going to come from both of us. And I think that that's very important. Somebody said, sorry, going through reading. Having a regular leaders meeting is good to go over incidents and questions that came up. And I think even just sharing different things that you've learned about kids, like, oh, I've learned that this kid really likes Jell-O, and maybe that's something that can be, you know, used in a later point. I think keeping track of some of those details, even if it's like in a book or like an Excel sheet of just specific details about kids, of, hey, this kid like reacted a little bit strangely and like got really hyper after having this specific type of candy. Yeah, so that's what's in the comments. Any final words from our subject matter experts before we finish up for today?
I was just gonna say, I think you guys are doing great. I'm sure that the work that you guys are doing at your course, it is making a difference. So just know that. I think Leah and I both kind of touched on this, but like normalizing these conversations, like if we're afraid to have these conversations, then these kids will find out from somewhere else. So if we're comfortable in having these conversations and recognizing, you know, what makes them unique and special in all their own ways, that's where that relationship starts and comes from. They're able to feel connected and at home. And I think a lot of the times, some of these things, neurodivergent, neurotypical, like words that we're kind of throwing at you, I think, I can't speak for Leah, but I would assume that we're saying them to make them a more normal part of the conversation. We don't want them to be like taboo words that you just don't say. Like, this is what these kids are experiencing. It's just what's going on in their lives, and normalizing that and making sure that we're aware and capable of what's going on with them is half of the work. So, yeah.
yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And just catch them being good. All kids are looking for an adult who will feed into them. And so just catch them being good. The statistic is you need to say 7 positives to 1 negative for that relationship to flourish. So just look at even the tiniest things, and it will help reframe the way that you look at the kids that can be the challenges too.
Well, thank you so much to both Kaila and Captain Leah for joining us today and for just imparting your wisdom. As a reminder, because this video has been recorded, we are going to go through and share that on YouTube, and we'll also send out an infographic that kind of breaks down some of these ideas into a little bit more simpler ways. We're really working on providing some resources, especially on behavior management, just because it is such a difficult field, and sometimes, you know, kids are all very different, but there are some very easy tips that can hopefully simplify just managing behavior and being inclusive to all different kinds of kids in your programs, and allowing for that to be like a smooth and just hopefully to just help with general behavior in your programs. As a reminder, in 2 weeks, we will be meeting again. We'll be hearing from Envoy Steve and Sharon Bussey, who are from the Eastern Territory. They're actually my parents, and they're going to be speaking on innovation in youth ministry. So please be sure to sign up for that. We're really excited to hear from them. And thank you all for your time and just for your willingness to come in and to learn. We appreciate you and the work that you're doing. So have a good rest of your day, guys. It was great to see you.